everyone. So today I will be talking about my experience observing a simulation. So I completed my simulation observation on September 4th at Highland Hospital with a group of nurse residents. So the learners in this case were from the nurse residency program. Basically, that program encompasses nurses that have had less than a year of experience. So the scenario, for the simulation, it included a 30-year-old female who was 4 days post-op from a lumpectomy. She was admitted to the hospital 1 day ago for fever and swelling. So at this point, the scenario begins with like time 0. So the nurses notice that she's now septic, and the nurse residents were required to institute the sepsis protocol. Additionally, during the simulation, the patient also lost IV access due to IV infiltration during her first bolus. So the patient on admission had not wanted her IVAD accessed. However, at this time, she allowed them to access the IVAD. Therefore, the residents were able to practice the steps of accessing an IVAD. So the scenario unfolded over 3 stages in what would have been a 2-hour period. The scenario itself didn't actually take 2 hours, but for our purposes, that's what we said it was. The scenario ultimately ended up with the patient being transferred to the ICU for a higher level of care. But after the simulation was complete, the residents took about 30 minutes to debrief. The debrief period was laid out using the debriefing diamond. So the debriefing diamond, I just put like a little example of it over on the side for you guys to see. So first basically is the description. First, nurses must recognize what happened during the situation. So they have to reinforce safe learning environment. They also can just make sure that everyone has the same understanding of what happened during the scenario. So after that, they transition into analysis, and this just kind of by clarifying any technical or clinical issues that arose during the simulation. So, for example, during the sim, the mannequin wasn't working properly at one point, so we had to kind of stop and move forward. So at this point, they went into the analysis stage. So this is where they spend most of their time. It's really where they just are able to interpret how they did and how their own performance was. It's really critical analysis of their own strengths and weaknesses. So after that, they transitioned into application. So this is really, how can I take what I learned now and put it into my own practice to ensure that patient care is better. So overall, the experience of the nurses obviously differed from person to person. While some of the residents were able to jump into the situation and take charge of the scenario, some nurses were noticeably more timid and they were obviously afraid to speak up. So another aspect of the simulation is that there was actually an NP who works at Highland present. I believe this caused many of the nurses to feel intimidated and panic a little bit. It was obvious what of the nurses felt comfortable communicating openly with providers and which ones still needed a little bit more practice with communicating. The NP did leave the room for the debriefing session, which I do think was beneficial. This way, the residents were able to open up about their feelings without feeling intimidated still by the NP that was there. Luckily, it was one of our very professional and courteous NPs, so it wasn't made to have a hostile learning environment. It was also helpful because some of the nurses that were more comfortable with talking with providers were able to give others tips and tricks that they've learned with communicating appropriately with providers. So overall, I feel that the situation was mostly beneficial for nurses who stepped outside of their comfort zone and fully immersed themselves in the situation without worrying how they would look. Unfortunately, as always, some of the residents felt, that they looked silly, or, it wasn't really something that they got into very much, unfortunately, and that really just hindered their own experience. However, it was beneficial because the debriefing period, really a lot of them did voice how they were feeling, and they did reflect pretty honestly with one another in a safe environment. So overall, some benefits that I felt go with the simulation is simulations obviously help to provide a safe environment for the learners. It's really up to the educators to maintain a positive attitude to help encourage students through the simulation. Simulations also help to improve critical thinking skills, as well as provide students with the opportunity to improve their hands-on skills as well. So in the case of this simulation, not all of the residents had actually had to implement the sepsis protocol, so it was critically analyzing what step they would take next in the care of the patient. Additionally, some of them also haven't had much luck or practice with IVADs, so it was another opportunity to again improve themselves and better their care for patients moving forward. So in the future, I would love to use simulations to help practicing nurses and students alike just feel more comfortable in their practice. So simulations, they really help the educator identify nurses or students that may need a little bit of extra help. Sometimes people can fly under the radar. However, once they're put into that sort of situation, it really becomes evident who needs help versus who's working very strongly. So simulations also allow the learner to identify personal growth opportunities and their strengths. It really just provides them with a better opportunity for reflection. So overall, I think that the simulation went very well. It was run very well. So Becky Knowles, the residency coordinator at Highland, it's obvious that her passion for new nurses in particular just shines through, and she really helped the ones that were more timid to kind of step out of their shell a little bit for the simulation. But again, really what was evident to me is you only get what you put in. So some of the nurses were clearly not as involved in the simulation as others. So it's definitely important to try to make everyone as involved as you can. But that's it. Thank you guys.